When we didn't have the capacity to evaluate mental health or the infrastructure to create rehabilitation services, leaders like Hammurabi created laws that called for an eye, a reference to government retaliation against crime. It's been roughly 3,800 years since then, and, well, a lot has changed. Yet, in the US, we still carry out that same archaic punishment. After a brief blip in its legality, the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, and since then, 1,491 people have been executed. I want to talk to you all today to remind you of why the death penalty should be abolished as we approach a time where the topic is coming up across the nation. Just recently, Virginia, a state with the second most executions next to Texas, voted to abolish the punishment. By our age, we all know the pain of loss. An empathetic person would acknowledge this pain of loss and never want another person or another family to experience that same feeling. The death penalty should be nationally abolished because it has no effect in deterring crime and is morally wrong and racially unjust. One of the main arguments that people use to endorse capital punishment is that the death penalty serves an important purpose in decreasing crime rates. Many people believe that the death penalty deters criminals from committing crimes because of the intense nature of the punishment. People usually back this argument with the fact that states with the death penalty have seen a reduction in crime over the years. Supporters of this argument naturally think that no one wants to die, therefore no one wants to receive this punishment, so in turn, no one will commit murder. Supporters will also suggest that the death penalty prevents recidivism, or reoccurring crimes. Technically, this makes sense. A convict will not be allowed to commit the same crime if they are dead. You can see how it's somewhat easy to fall into this trap of believing that the death penalty reduces crime rates, but when we take a closer look into the science of deterrence, we can see that this is far from the truth. The death penalty, simply put, fails when it comes to reducing crime. First, let me explain why the death penalty has no deterrence effect and therefore does not reduce crime. There are countless factors at play when we think about someone's reason for committing a crime like murder, so it's hard to imagine that the existence of the death penalty plays a significant role. But we don't just have to imagine. There is research to support this idea as well. The Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology asked expert criminologists and police chiefs to provide their objective opinion based on the research that they have carried out in response to the question, quote, "Does the death penalty act as a deterrent to the commitment of murder?" End quote. 83% of criminologists answered no to this question. Also, there's concrete and clear data that states with the death penalty, including states like Alabama and Louisiana, have higher murder rates than states without the punishment. Supporters of capital punishment will say that the murder rate in their state has decreased over time, and they will attribute this to the existence of the death penalty. In reality, the murder rate has decreased in virtually every U.S. state, thus having more to do with modernization than anything else. While the homicide rate has decreased in virtually every state in the U.S., Louisiana, a state that carries out the death penalty, currently has the highest homicide rate in the nation at 12.4 per 100,000 people. This proves that the existence of the death penalty has done nothing to reduce murder rates at the state level. We can also think about the mental side of committing a crime and how criminals rarely contemplate punishments when committing crimes. In his novel about rage-type murder, Duncan Cartwright suggests that, quote, all types of violence are about the expression of unbearable states of mind, end quote. This is in no way a justification for any type of crime, but it shows that violent crimes are usually committed under intense states of mental stress, making it extremely difficult to think about a punishment like the death penalty. Try to think about a situation where someone is so angry that they are motivated to kill another person. They're fuming and they don't know what to do. They have nowhere to turn to express this disturbed state of mind. Then, they remember that their state carries out the death penalty. So they calm down, they take some deep breaths, and they return home. I don't know about you, but that doesn't exactly sound realistic to me. On top of this, an FBI report studied the behaviors of 63 active shooters and found that 40% had a psychiatric diagnosis and 70% had proven mental health stressors. This proves that the vast majority of murderers had an intensely altered state of mind, and they were not thinking about the consequences of their actions or the existence of the death penalty, but rather acting on their unbearable state of mind. By suggesting that criminals do not fully contemplate punishments when committing crimes, I'm in no way justifying their actions or suggesting that punishment shouldn't exist, but rather proving how the death penalty simply cannot act as a deterrent to crime when criminals do not think about it. Whether we analyze the numbers and find that the existence of the death penalty has done nothing to reduce murder rates, or think about the mentality of murderers, it's clear that the death penalty does not act as a deterrent to crime and does not decrease crime rates. Not only does the death penalty fail at reducing crime, but it is also morally wrong and racially unjust. Throughout its history, the death penalty has never been carried out equally. Mostly white juries are much more likely to sentence a person of color to death than they are a fellow white person. The Death Penalty Information Center reported that, quote, since 1977, 295 African Americans have been executed for interracial murders of white victims, while only 21 white defendants have been executed for the interracial murders of black victims, end quote. This shows how preconceived racial bias that paints black people as violent and dangerous seeps into the jury pool and causes African Americans to be sentenced to death at much higher rates than white people. According to the ACLU, since 1976, people of color have accounted for a disproportionate 40% of the total executions and make up 55% of the current death row population. It's clear that the death penalty has been disproportionately applied to people of color in the U.S., specifically African Americans. This is because of America's history of racial inequities, along with the racist judicial system that more often than not includes an immensely biased jury. This can lead to false convictions or situations where the punishment is much too intense for the crime, providing yet another reason for why the death penalty should cease to exist. Furthermore, the death penalty is morally wrong because it can result in the death of innocent people. This country's judicial system is in no way perfect and, in fact, very flawed, which means that innocent people have been murdered by the government for no reason whatsoever. This is possibly one of the most daunting arguments against the death penalty because it seems inconceivable that there is a system in place where innocent people could be murdered at the hands of the government. A study published by a team of legal experts used the latest statistical techniques and historical data to estimate that 4.1% of defendants sentenced to death in the modern era are innocent. It is unacceptable to put people's lives in the hands of a flawed system. Moreover, the death penalty is morally wrong because it is no better when the government is committing murder than anyone else. In elementary school, I remember being sent to timeout for retaliating to a kid pushing me by pushing him back. I yelled, "He did it first!" And I remember the teacher responding, "That doesn't matter." It seems that we've moved backwards from that. Currently, the government uses their might to solve problems, not their mind. In our modern world, we've built up an arsenal of tactics to constructively punish while teaching in the process, yet the leaders of the free world still use brute force? For those of you who are religious, the Bible itself teaches, quote, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," end quote. This idea is common sense, but something overrides our mind when it comes to murder. We have to reach deep down towards the empathy within us and realize that taking the high road, the road that is more constructive, the road that is more humane, the road that is more equitable, is always better. Everyone, no matter your circumstances, where you come from, have redeemable qualities that are meant to be shared with the world. Miroslav Volf from the Yale Center of Faith and Culture says that, quote, "Nobody, absolutely nobody, is beyond redemption," end quote. The federal scheduling of deaths must be stopped because the death penalty is racially unjust and morally wrong. In conclusion, the death penalty clearly does not serve as a deterrent to crime because 1. That is what expert criminologists have reported. 2. Because states with the death penalty have not seen a reduction in crime or murder rates. And 3. Because criminals rarely contemplate punishments when committing crimes. The death penalty is also racially unjust, sentencing black people at a much higher rate than any other racial group because of preconceived racial biases. The death penalty is morally wrong because it is simply another commitment of murder, but this time organized and by the U.S. government, and it can result in the execution of innocent people. There are countless arguments that explain the death penalty's inadequacies, and sadly today, I'm only able to explain a few. As I discussed before, just recently Virginia has voted to abolish the death penalty. This issue around the death penalty will continue to come up across the country, and I want you all to be a force for truth and a force for good. As you know, there's plenty of false information out there, so I want you all to use what you have learned today to educate your parents and siblings on the facts while still letting them form educated opinions for themselves. It's so important that we are all aware of how flawed the death penalty truly is, as it takes the national stage in upcoming years. By educating your friends and family, and emailing senators and representatives, we can abolish this archaic institution once and for all. Thank you.